Hello and welcome to Life in Focus with me, your host, Stephen Akinsanya. Last week, I was blessed to go and speak to a group of young men in North London, speaking about my own upbringing, my own challenges, my school days, my aspirations, my hopes, and where I'd ended up as a barrister. And it was interesting to listen to these young men who some of them had aspirations of doing the usual, i.e., I want to play football. Others were not sure about what they wanted to do. And also amongst the group were some who thought certain vocations, certain jobs were not for them, or they didn't see anybody who looked like them. And that got me thinking about this week's show. And when I met this young man recently, and he told me what he did for a living, I was intrigued, very intrigued. So I invited him on the show, and he's here today on the platform. I'm going to introduce him in a moment, but I just want to say to viewers who will watch this that it's really important not to be pigeonholed, to be stereotyped. Do the research about anything you're interested in. Don't be too worried that you don't see anybody who looks like you, because in today's modern world, you can be connected with people who are doing the things that you want to do, who look like you. But that should never be a deterrent. What's important is having the passion, the desire, and the ambition to work hard. So without further ado, let me introduce my guest. Jahran Allen-Thompson MBE. He's a highly skilled operations professional with over 14 years of experience in the mortuary services field. He's the current operations manager for Waltham Forest Mortuary Service and acting mortuary manager in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. A really interesting man that I met a couple of months ago. And so in this podcast, I'm going to speak to him about his journey, challenges, the type of work that he does, and his hopes and aspirations for the future. And obviously, how he thinks we might help some of our young people who are losing their way to the tragic work of at the hands of a knife or a gun. So without further ado, let me welcome Jahran to the platform and say it's an absolute pleasure, Jahran, for you to join me on the Life in Focus platform.
Thank you, Stephen. It's my pleasure to be here, to be honest. When I learned about the work that you were doing with Life in Focus, I thought it'd be a fantastic opportunity to share news of what we're doing in Waltham Forest and also a little bit about my history and background. So I'm aware that you had some questions. I'm more than happy to roll into them.
Wonderful. Well, that is exactly where I want to start before we get on to what you're currently doing now. I want to take Jahran back to school. Let's go back to school, Jahran. The young boy growing up. Let's start off by telling us where you grew up and your school experience. What I know when I often do talks, I share about my experience of being one of only two black children in the class and being called all sorts of names back in the 70s. Let's see how yours compares.
All right. So I was born in Hackney, Homerton Hospital in 1988 before the song made it cool. I grew up in Leighton, which is in East London. I went to Beaumont Primary School, which was the local school in the area, that I grew up in. And I was diagnosed with dyslexia, at a very young age,
Mm.
around the time where I was learning to write. My P's, G's, D's, and B's were backwards, or not always in the correct direction.
Mm.
So that was a indicator to my teacher, who was very skilled, obviously. Um, and she informed my mother, and there was some tests that I went through in primary school to get me the correct sort of support that I really needed. My handwriting was and has always been poor.
I like
But
mine.
But in relation to sort of growing up, violence has been something that's almost been ever present in sort of my youth.
Mm,
My sort of first memory of something violent or traumatic happening to someone I know, or well, a early memory I'll say, is a close friend was shot at. He must have been no older than about 13 years old. There was a
mm,
2 year age gap between us. He was on his way home. A car slowed down. He lived on the estate. I lived relatively close. Yeah, a car slowed down and fired at him and then drove away. He the same day, rode his bicycle to my mum's house to knock on me, knock for me to see if I could come out to play. So off I went outside and he told me the story. We even went back to the place where the incident happened. I was able to see this chunk missing out of a fence that he was walking past. And yeah, that was one of my earlier memories involving violence. I haven't spoken publicly about my childhood, so I thought this would be an opportunity to discuss that I myself was a victim of sexual abuse, or survivor of sexual abuse as a young child, a member of the family. Um, uh, yeah, I was the perpetrator. And myself and my mother only really discussed this relatively recently when that family member was arrested for something unrelated, but that linked into those style of crimes.
mm,
I attended Norlington Boys' School as a secondary school. And it was challenging immediately. You go from being the largest and knowing everyone in primary school to being the smallest and knowing no one in secondary school.
yeah.
So I found years 7 through 9 were relatively difficult, making that adjustment. And it wasn't necessarily in relation to there are more people in this school now, that's a given, but it's more sort of attitudes and challenges that other students were having. As I mentioned, it was an all boys school. So,
Mm,
there's no one to show off for. So I was under the impression that no one would be showing off at all. But with what I know now about individuals' sort of lives and households, I'm under the impression that some of the students that I didn't necessarily get on along with as well may have had some challenges at home.
mm,
From about year 9, I think I started to get a hang on what this school thing was about. How to, best to um negotiate those social situations. I found that school became very tribal. In roughly year 9 and above, folk that I'd grown up with, some individuals that we'd attend each other's parents' houses, play video games, etc.
mm,
Broke off into tribes depending on where they lived, and that became rather challenging because during summer holidays and or breaks, individuals would meet up, something would happen, and that would inform what happens in school, and there'd be a sort of a back and forth um, between individuals that bristled each other um,
mm.
outside. Um, in relation to college, I attended Barking College first. My aspirations as a child were to become an architect. I wanted, to be involved in just leaving a legacy of design, in the world. Um, I didn't complete the BTEC in construction and built environment that I began to study. My memories of the events where that was kicked out of Barking College during that sort of period of my life, college. Things were relatively difficult at home. My mum and myself had some challenges, in relation to communicating with one another. Um, I attended another college in Hackney called Brook House, or B6 college, and got ample dyslexia support. Studied subjects that I thought would be really interesting to me. So I studied law, philosophy, sociology, psychology, and I had to resit an English GCSE,
Mm.
literature, I believe it was. But during that time in college, I moved out of my mum's house and began working. Not immediately. I stayed with my nan for some time, but began working part time in a restaurant called Jonglers, which used to be a comedy club, which would turn
Oh
into
yes, I remember
it.
John. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. So it used to turn into sort of a party after the comedy would end. So I was working in the Battersea branch there
Oh, I
at
know the one just up by the magistrates' court.
wait, there we go.
Yeah,
Yes,
I've been
right.
there. Yeah.
Yep. So I was working there when I was 17, 18, so I'll track the years back in the gym. But I was working as a waiter when I started work there, and very quickly into my time working there, I believe one of the customers referred to a colleague of mine as coloured, and I then asked the colleague, you should really tell the management about this, they must be able to do something.
Mm.
And nothing was done, unfortunately. So I said, oh, you know what? I don't want to be in and around the punters. Is there a job that you guys have here that will keep me away from the customers? Luckily, there was a role in the kitchen that was available and paid an extra, 35 pence an hour. So I was on £5.50 pay
Yeah,
jump. So yeah, I started working in the kitchen
right.
there. Stayed for a year and then did some culinary work in another place for a year. Um, Before I move on to the mortuary stuff, I also mention in 2007 I began working for a company that had contracts in hospitality in about six stadiums in the UK. So it includes Wembley Stadium, Arsenal, Pride Park in Derby. Um, During my 9 year part-time ad hoc career with them, I was able to be involved in the Olympic Games. Worked closely with Locog in relation to KPI performance for the Olympic venues. And the company also took over the Olympic Stadium. We were calling it Stadium 185 at the time, but they took over the Olympic Stadium just after the games and before West Ham started there. So that was one of the last projects I worked on um, with that company before I left in 2016.
Yeah.
Um, I'll be very quick in relation to my career there, and then I'm happy to take as much cross-examination as possible on the story so far. But
Okay.
in relation to my career with that company, I began working in concessions. So effectively, have you ever been to a football match before?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. So if you went in at the general admission level, so not in boxes or in corporate hospitality, I mean the general admission.
Oh, that's where you'll
That
find me.
that's good. That's where I started my career. So it was yes, here's your beer, sir, etc. And seemed to be in good spirits about just being able to earn an income. Therefore, I was headhunted by other members of the internal human resources team to
Mm,
assist with some onboarding. So that involved supporting new individuals when they started at the company to do their journey, to their first day. It then spiraled into supporting with the company's inductions, which then grew into being the sole training officer for the company that employed 0 hour, but about 4,500 staff throughout the UK. So that was a massive part of my life. Really, I learned so much
mm.
there. And very quickly before I yield, it would be in relation to sort of further education. During the course of me juggling three jobs,
Mm.
I attended university part time to study biomedical science. Only managed to do roughly a year of it before
Yeah.
it was too much of a challenge. But yeah, that's a quick rundown of
Right.
my career so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, just on that last point, I mean, the biomedical side, you say was too much of a challenge. When you say too much of a challenge, are you referring to the academic side of it, the coursework, or just too many things going on in your life?
I think the latter, to be honest, there are too many things. I think the challenge around higher education that I've found has been if people step into HE around the normal in inverted commas time, they're not juggling these extra life challenges. Arguably, they'd be still at home with parents and or able to get, student loans and student accommodation, etc.
Mm,
With me, I was attempting to get higher education into an already challenging working schedule.
mm.
Which didn't work well for me in at that time, but it's something I'm considering.
Right. And if I can take you back, I mean, one thing I've sort of gathered from all that you said is this industrious spirit of yours. You don't seem to have stopped from the time you were a sort of young teenager. You seem to have always realized the importance of to keep going, to keep rediscovering, trying things.
I think what I'd say to that is I didn't really feel like I had a choice.
Right.
Because of the environment I found myself in growing up, it was unsafe. So my options were really, file in and do, what the rest of the individuals in the area are doing,
Mm,
and or make a decision to attempt to get that escape velocity.
mm,
I'm sure you're aware of the term crabs in a barrel or
Yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, there are often a lot of pressures inside of an environment like the one I came from, which people would rather destroy your hard work at times than see you succeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really it's been I think out of necessity that I've worked so hard.
Well, I think
And it's
that's.
been
Sorry, Jaron, carry on.
sorry, I was just gonna wrap up with but it's been at cost, to be honest. Some of the things I've done in my career have stopped me from being able to pursue the holiday a year or children so far,
Mm.
etc. Yeah, so I don't know if it was the best
Don't have
decision to
time
make.
for
I hope so.
that. But no, interestingly, I mean, you talked about you sort of had no choice, but other than if you took the alternative decision to file in with others and what was going on around you. But you were still conscious enough to make a choice. You made a choice, didn't you? Because I
Yeah.
often hear, certainly in the line of work that I do, I had no choice. But I think sometimes it's important to hear the message that we do have choices.
I think definitely. I'll build out a bit to say that I received a very strong counter programming education at home in relation to understanding that Black history in the UK, where we are in this greater struggle. And I
Mm,
think that made it a lot easier to put my decisions into context.
mm,
Do I want this short-term gain today? What will that do for us in relation to a movement? Am I going to end up on the front of a newspaper with the word thug written above me? How does that impact the psyche of other young people? So, it's
yeah.
really asking myself where I'd like to be inside of this wider
Mm,
piece,
mm.
and making decisions that hopefully fit in with the values that I have.
Well, that's interesting. Last week, I spoke to a group of young men about the ripple effect when you drop a stone into water and the number of people who can be affected by that decision that you make, the wrong one. And I guess for all of us, we're in a position where sometimes we look at decisions we make in isolation for ourselves, but it can also have a ripple effect to impact other people and how they're perceived. And so, I think there's a Jamaican saying where they say "walk good," and I think it's right that we remember that sometimes, whether you can discuss the rights and wrongs of it, we are ambassadors. Um,
I believe so.
I want to ask you, Jaren, and obviously I don't want to explore this too deeply, but simply to say that the person who caused you that trauma when you were younger, um, were you able to report it and for them to be prosecuted, or is it something that you've just decided to leave and move on?
So I haven't decided what to do about it at all, to be honest. I said first time publicly mentioning it previously.
Yeah.
This was unknown about in my family until this particular arrest and charge of that individual for something else.
Mm,
So I spoke to family, and I'm really trying to decide what to do. To be honest, I'm aware there were other
mm,
victims, survivors. I know a few of them were yeah,
well,
known to me.
mm,
So yeah, I'm completely unaware, to be completely honest, at this stage on what's next.
yeah. Well, the only counsel I will give you is that certainly in my line of work and experience, these things are taken very, very seriously, albeit historic. They are taken very, very seriously. And so when the time comes, if that time does come and you want to do something about it, there are plenty of people who will listen and will take it seriously. That's all I'll say on that.
Thank you, Stephen. That's really valuable. I've done, as I said, when things began to come to the fore, in 2019, I've done tranches of research around historic allegations and understanding that they will be taken seriously. At the moment, my immediate focuses are getting to November in relation to the service that I'll speak to you about a little bit later
Yeah.
on.
Right. Well,
Y-
let's bring you forward now. I mean, you seem to have done so much as a young teenager, and interestingly, and I hope our young people understand this, that here you are with an ambition to be an architect. Um, and then we look at where you are now. Now, I remember growing up, uh, and my parents caught me reading a book about famous murders, and they were really worried. But little did they know at the time that I had a fascination in court cases and what happened in court to people who committed certain crimes. And I guess they'll say the rest is history, because what have I been doing for the last 30 years? But let's fast forward. I mean, the mortuary service is not something that you just stumble across. So when I met you and you told me what you did, I was like, huh? So let's pick it up there. Tell me how you got involved in the mortuary service, and then we'll explore actually what the function of a mortuary is. I have some questions around that.
Great. So I believe that the dyslexic mind is an interesting thing. I've done a lot more research about it. Especially during COVID, I had a lot of time in between work shifts to do nothing other than, try to get to know myself a bit better. So
Mm,
yeah, did a lot of research effectively, and I chalk a lot of my sort of successes and decisions down to me being a non-linear thinker. I'll give you the example in relation to this career. So in 2008, I was working in a restaurant just outside the Tate Modern, in fairness, in the kitchen. And 2008 rolled around, and as I said, there was a recession, which impacted business dramatically. We weren't getting the same number of walk-ins, bookings, etc. And I thought about what I want to do with my career. I was relatively new in the stadium work. I was performing, hadn't had those promotions that I mentioned there yet. So I thought, what sort of work could I go into that would be okay inside of a recession, that I can try and make a difference in, these sorts of key drivers, asking myself about my values.
mm,
And thought, that mortuary work would be around as long as there's people, effectively. So did some phoning around, and my closest hospital told me to give a call to the public mortuary, as it was named at the time. I'm
mm,
in Waltham Forest. I couldn't get them on the phone. Literally, I'd phone up and my lunch breaks as a chef, which is probably
mm,
like 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm
mm,
phoning, I'm getting voicemail. I'm like, what's going on here? Something is wrong. Like, have I got the wrong number? Little
mm.
did I know they actually started work there at 5:45 in the morning most mornings, but they
Wow.
finished at 1:15 Monday to Thursday, and they used to finish at midday-ish on a Friday. So once I learned this, I'm like, right, I'm definitely getting into this job. Finishing. I don't mind how early I start, as long as I can finish early. It's an opportunity. So did some volunteering in 2008 just to see whether I could manage the sights and sounds of being in that industry. I remember one of the first cases that I was able to support with was an individual who had passed away due to going under a train. So you can imagine what level of advanced trauma that was like to see.
Yeah.
And effectively, the senior technician at the time was old school in inverted commas. So, they go, right, you get this needle, and I'm terrible at accents, so I won't try and do one, but you get this
Yeah.
needle, and this is the basics of how you would suture. So I've attempted to have a go, and he's like, fine, yeah, you keep going, and he just left me to it. So, during the course of time, the job became available in March. Sorry, late.
Can I just stop
Go
you
on.
there? How old are you at this time?
At that time, I started the job at 20 years old, so I must have been maybe 19 at the time.
And you're actually dealing with a body.
Yeah, he just threw me right into it because I can
Wow.
imagine the rationale, especially at that time, was that it's difficult to find people that want to work in this industry. If they do, then with the correct checks, make sure that they can actually manage it before
Yeah.
any sort of further work is done. So I could understand the rationale. It was a little bit rough, to go into the job that way, but such is
Wow.
the nature. So anyway,
Wow.
so I yeah got a job in March of 2009 at that facility,
Mm,
um and began my sort of career path, really learning as much as I possibly could to prepare for exams. I also implemented a database to track information on individual cases, because believe it or not, the facility ran on paper. A lot of mortuaries in and around the country still do run on paper, which makes it rather difficult to audit, for example. Um, but yeah, so that's a little bit of a nutshell as to how I started, but I'm more than happy to go into detail
mm,
as to where the career is now.
mm. But I mean, well, you told us about how you started and your first experience. Was there ever a moment where you thought, this isn't for me. I can't be here.
Um, more moments than I'd happily talk about
Yeah.
on this podcast. So let me try and find some moments that I'm okay to discuss. Sorry, can we pause? I've got a buzzer at the front door. Is this possible?
You can disappear and go and come straight
Cool.
back. It's
All right, I'll
live.
pause for 2 seconds.
Okay. It's one of the joys of life in focus. You never know what's going to happen, whether your guest is going to take delivery of his pizza.
Well, I'm hoping it is a pizza because I didn't order anything. So, um, so in relation to when I thought the job was not for me, any case involving young persons, to be honest, is where I think, to myself about what and why I'm here. To be honest, it is traumatic to see the impact of violence on young folk. It's
Well, I was
traumatic
going
to
to ask you. I was going to ask you about that later on. I mean, I was just curious that one so young who makes a phone call ends up at the facility, and then before you know it, you're suturing. And I'm thinking, was there ever a moment where you thought, I can't see me doing this as a career or even being involved in this field?
Yeah, so at those times, to be honest, so any young person involvement, there's also times during COVID where I've thought about what and why. Um, yeah, I'm involved in this. I think it really comes back to me trying to be in place to assist and support my community. I grew up in Waltham Forest myself, so
Mm,
I'm under the impression and feeling that these individuals that I'd be caring for, are friends, or relatives of friends or family or individuals that I would have bumped into on my travels. So that is, really the important part about this. Sorry, Stephen, again, 3 seconds. It may be the pizza. I've hit the buzzer. 3 seconds.
okay. Save me a slice.
Will do. All right, rock and roll. So,
Okay.
in relation to sort of other moments that I've thought about whether I can do this or not, it is the skill set that we are attempting to teach individuals that
Mm,
are in our service in our industry is rather mind-boggling. Effectively, there is a technical skill set that involves teaching someone how to use a scalpel surgically, to remove internal organs of a deceased person. Now, not everybody is geared up for that sort of a process, and I think trying to decipher, why people are actually trying to be part of this industry has been a challenge. But I've tried to ensure that I'm leaving the door open to individuals correctly vetted and checked, to try and provide them an opportunity, like I was a long time ago. So, yeah, there are a few points, sometimes a few in a week, to be completely honest, where I'll have a moment of metacognition and think about long-term plans and goals. But
mm,
overall, I think the greater good is why I'm doing this.
Well, I mean, here you are. I think we all understand what a mortuary is, as a facility, and I think you'll confirm that there are mortuaries across the country. There need to be.
Yep, there's a
Uh,
statutory responsibility for local
yeah,
authorities to provide the service. Yes.
right. And as an operations manager, I want to try and understand more about the responsibility of fulfilling that role.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to give you some more information. So, Um, my roles evolved really during the course of my time with Waltham Forest. It began, as I said, as a volunteer, matured into trainee anatomical pathology technologist. But due to the database that I mentioned to you earlier, I was able to illustrate to auditors that attended in 2013 that
Mm,
not only were Waltham Forest not charging other local authorities for cases that were sent into our mortuary, also to illustrate that we could have pulled a phenomenal amount of income, something to the tune of 499,000 pounds in income by charging for these cases. So we underwent a restructure, and hopefully not because of the audit findings, but we underwent a restructure, and we were due to be given to governance and finance, as it was then named, um, to support well, to manage the mortuary function. I pushed back a little bit to ask for a wider remit in relation to some operational oversight, but also strategic and tactical oversight. So I was given that. So effectively, my role sees me attempting to maximize output for the facility. Looking at things like efficiencies, looking at hospital KPIs like average length of stay from a health informatics standpoint, has allowed me to really try to optimize the workflow of individuals moving through our service. Our delays are costly, in inverted commas, meaning they cost families by compounding their grief. They cost the mortuary service in relation to having a space in the mortuary that can't be utilized for more cases. Um, so yeah, my sort of goal was around optimizing that service
Mm.
output, and that was really what I think was integral to our pandemic success. Effectively, we were able to manage the facility, and support other local authorities and coroner services as well as our own. Some of the strategic sort of and tactical goals that I have are around utilizing sort of new technology when we reopen our facility,
Mm.
to ensure that this cause of death process, finding out a cause of death, can be done smoother. There's partners that we're in discussions with that produce artificial intelligence software, machine learning algorithms, augmented and mixed reality utilizations. There's partners in the military and the NHS that we're discussing how to build, this service into a world leader, really.
Wow.
Um, we are reopening in November as the East London Forensic Centre with a CT scanner, effectively, and this entire project of about £6 million is something that I've been sort of integral in kicking off and managing through COVID. In fairness, I started the original feasibility study in 2018, and that has built out this project to there. Effectively, will be finished somewhere in November, which is yeah, it feels like a life's work already, and I'm still relatively young.
Wow. Yes, indeed. In fact, how old were you when you received your MBE?
So I have not received it in person as of yet, but I was asked in November of last year if I would accept one. And I said yes. This is in the formal process. So
Well,
then it
just
was
on that, because
go.
I read recently, and there are other well-known cases of people who've been asked if they would accept the award, and people have said no for
Mm,
various reasons. But let's just play devil's advocate.
go for it.
I'm someone in the community who thinks, um, who's appalled by the way the Windrush heroes have been treated in terms of reparations. The argument about countries being remunerated for all that's been taken. Someone says to you, why on earth would you want to receive an Empire Medal? What's your response?
Hopefully it would be a larger discussion. To be honest, but I'm glad you asked the question. For me, I listen to as many different sources of information as I possibly can to try and triangulate what best to do when presented with an opportunity like that.
Mm.
For me, the overarch was trying to be in a room, trying to be in the room to affect change. I have always had a habit of speaking truth to power. It's
Mm.
because I think I came from sort of a world that I didn't, expect to live this long, let alone be in the position to have some of these discussions.
Yeah.
Um, so, I'd want my community to be inspired, really, and try, to listen to some of this podcast ideally to learn a little bit more about me and what my goals are in and around the community.
Well, you
um
mentioned something quite interesting there, Jahran, which is a philosophy, if you like, that I subscribe to, that sometimes the fighting and the arguing or the challenges are best done when you're in the room.
Mm.
That's why you need to be in the room.
And there's this massive push at the moment for EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. So for me, I feel sort of honored to an extent to be part of this wider conversation, and I feel that this award, for whatever reason, it was passed on, and I'll tell you about it a little bit later on.
Mm,
Gives me an opportunity to really affect change. Especially looking at the history of this country and the states, etc., with how legislation and policy have impacted black and brown ethnic minority here individuals.
mm,
I think it's important to try and have a wider discussion, around things like the honors system. For me personally, I feel that the problems with policy that successive sort of governments have attempted to entrench, and particular institutions have attempted to entrench, can only really be tackled by us when we start to have the discussions that would be potentially uncomfortable.
mm,
um, I think, I'm more than happy for anyone in the community to reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can discuss my decision making
mm,
better, and how best I can maximize my platform, if there is one, to affect change. I'd also say, most of my heroes were assassinated effectively. My strong counter education provided by my mother gave me the Marcus Garveys, the Malcolm X's, the Martin Luther Kings, Stokely Carmichaels. I can keep going.
mm,
Just individuals that have attempted to be part of the struggle, and affect change, really. And I'm aware that my presence in particular rooms upsets people at the first instance. But if even if people don't like my decisions, hopefully they'll respect them. When they get to know a bit more about
mm. Wow. Um, got any ideas who you're taking on the big day?
me. So I think I get three guests. So I'll
Okay.
be bringing my mother and my father, who are not together anymore. They've not been together my entire life. So and it's an opportunity to get them both in the same place at the same time. And my partner, I'd assume. Yeah.
Mm,
So I think that if that's my three. If not, I may have to cull that list. But mum will
yeah.
definitely be coming along. And
Wonderful.
yeah, I've told her if anyone tries to touch her hair, she can hit them.
Wonderful. Something I read, I was interested. I was reading more about the kind of work you do and the ambitions, and there was something that you said, which I was trying to understand in the context of the work you do, and then I found myself asking, was I right to ask myself the question, is it like a business? So, um, you described your goals as trying to maximize output while minimizing the necessary investment of time, money, and labor, which I think you have dealt with in one of your previous answers. And then you talked about an increase in income to Waltham Forest Mortuary by 3,750% during the time you were there. Um, so I was asking myself the question, even in the sort of sad reality of, as we all pass, we're all going to pass away one day, and no doubt end up in a mortuary. Is it like a business?
So good question. I'll touch on the first point
Yeah.
around income generation first. So during that was last year's figures that we were using for the 3,750%. If we use this financial year that's just sorry, last financial year that just ended, we're somewhere near 10,150%. So I will update my
Wow.
LinkedIn yes, as soon as I possibly can. So I think um as I said, when I started in 2008, this was a paper-based service. We weren't taking and recording logs in a way that could be audited and reviewed. And really, me finding that gap gave us the opportunity to actually start to invoice these other local authorities, which
Mm,
I think pushed them to invest in their mortuary services, which helped East London during the pandemic. So I think there's a little bit of a seesaw in relation to us creating income. But I'll build this out. So I believe I've developed a reputation nationally in my industry, uh in relation to sort of coroner's services, to inform them really of how well the job is done when I'm present. And that's seen us taking on work from other local authorities, definitely, other counties, other coroners, jurisdictions, and also seen myself and team go as far as Wales to be involved in post-mortem examinations due to particular issues that they were having. So really, I think my attitude to life really is a bit summed up with game theory. You know, I see the service we're attempting to provide as infinite. There's no end to the need for this service. So how do we improve it? How do we reinvest the income that we make in making the service better? The 6 million that we've investing, Waltham Forest investing in, creating the East London Forensic Centre is really, an investment that the taxpayer is making in the service. And any income we then make will go to pay off the debt that we have, to that taxpayer. Um, so I wouldn't see mortuary as a business. I'd see it more as a service. As I mentioned, local authorities are statutory bound to have a mortuary provision. But
Mm,
in Waltham Forest, we're attempting to innovate really in this space. We're attempting to lead in London in relation to the capabilities that we'll have to offer.
mm,
Um, yeah, and I think that there's room really for the taxpayer to save money across the United Kingdom really by building centres of excellence like the one that we're opening up in East London,
mm,
and attempting to share services really like we're doing in Tower Hamlets. My
yeah.
staff are working there, and I'm also managing Waltham Forest caseload as well. This gives us a great opportunity really to build skills, resources, and resilience, which arguably were the three R's that or the two R's that might have been necessary at the last major challenge we had.
Mm. Wow. Um, two things that I want young people to observe that I've observed with you. First of all, there's this self-assured confidence that radiates through, and knowledge. Uh, Sometimes people's self-assuredness is mistaken for arrogance. Um, but I want you to say a few words about why it's important to be self-assured and also to have the knowledge to go with it in certain spaces where there aren't many people who look like you.
So that's twofold. So in relation to self-assured and in relation to knowledge. So I'll build out the self-assured piece.
Mm,
I've got experience. I've been in this industry for 14 years, and I'm just coming off the back of working through, one of the worst global health challenges, in the history of mankind. So I don't know if my self-assuredness is um effectively my battle scars that I'm wearing on my person. Yes, and I have been accused of being arrogant before. I will not say who by, but they were very high powered, to be completely honest. And the words I'd say to young people is when you have the correct information, stand on it.
mm,
When you are right, you are right. And that's it sounds very simple and very cut and dry, but it requires building and being fearless. And I think because of the amount of trauma that I've experienced in my childhood, fear is not something that registers for me.
mm, yeah.
I do like the acronym though, which is face everything and rise for fear. And I utilize it with my staff on a regular basis. You can imagine some of the things that we encounter. And my goal as a leader in this space is to stay calm, is to attempt to understand what
Mm,
is happening and to try and make the best decisions possible. And I'm sure that I won't be right always, but I don't approach um situations from a perspective of I'm talking down to you as I'm the subject
mm,
matter expert. It's not in my nature, to be honest. We are attempting to provide a service collaboratively alongside the coroner service at times, the Met Police, etc.
mm,
To give families, some answers really.
mm,
And I think that as long as I continue to self-improve and continue to develop in this space, I'll be able to provide or make a real difference. I hope.
yeah. Wonderful. Now I met you a couple of months ago. It must have been now at the Harker project in Poplar. I think we share a passion in relation to young people being on the right path, making the right choices, being surrounded by positive influences. And, we've been having this discussion for as long as I can remember now about youth violence and knife crime and gun crime. And I think you've alluded to the fact that, you've seen things growing up even where you were. Do you have any views and then maybe suggestions for how we might, first of all, identify what the problem is with youth violence, particularly with the knife, but increasingly with firearms as well, um, and how we might tackle it?
So it's a two-parter, but I'll touch
Yeah.
on the work with Poplar Harker first, and then roll
Mm,
into suggestions. So I attempt to network as best as possible. In any events that I'm fortunate enough to attend. I was given an unsung hero award by Waltham Forest earlier this year, late last year, and met Katie Thompson through work in a different capacity, her
mm,
work in a different capacity there. So I was able to speak to her about some of the work that I'm attempting to be involved in around violence reduction, and she was able to point me at individuals like companies like Poplar Harker to
mm,
speak to some young people, which is where we met. So I'm really heartened that people do exist inside of this organization, and world really, that are happy to help. Katie knows a lady that I grew up knowing, named Jane. She was working in the estate in relation to violence reduction, and had been doing that. He was still doing it at the time that I started in the local authority as a member of staff. So it was quite nice to bump into her in the town
mm,
hall and her to call out my nickname, which I will not repeat. So, in relation to views on tackling youth crime, especially gun and knife crime, I really think that honesty and accountability need to be at the heart of all of the work that is done. I think that there have been reports and research done by experts in relation to, do we look at this as a public health issue instead of looking at it from the lens of enforcement only? You can only arrest so many people. Arguably, is an arrest what is needed for a 14, 15-year-old, young man who may have been misguided or groomed in not a sexual respect, but
mm,
in the respect where they're given uh, an environment that rewards behavior that is socially destructive. To be
mm,
honest, arguably, some individuals, especially ones that have gone through the care system, may or may not have been surrounded by these sorts of influences as
mm,
early as possible. So I really think that honesty and accountability, and really looking at this as a public health issue, and not just parents need to do or schools need to do.
mm,
This buck pass is the laziest form of governance. To be honest, I think also pressure groups like the Black Equity Organization and others. There's a list of charities that with your consent I'll release after this
mm,
that I've attempted to do some work with, that are really trying to shine a light on positive things that can be done in communities. One is Black 100 Black Men of London that I mentioned. Another is Action for Race Equality, Route to Inspire, Roots to Inspire. I can keep going.
mm.
But I really think that it's creating this mesh, of organizations and public health sort of leaders, really, to start to look at this from a different perspective. It's not just families, it's not just schools, it's looking at it in a wider context, and also understanding some of the uh, potential drivers for youth behavior. Who are their role models? Do we know? Are these role models people that individuals would want their children to be following growing up? How do we try to deprogram them? What leverage or action can we take against a social media giant, for example, that would allow me to make a diss song for you right now, after this, which might exacerbate violence? How do we look at this in a global or all of health response?
Mm,
And the same challenges that are affecting our youth here in the UK are also
mm,
affecting our youth in the Caribbean, in America, and in
mm,
Africa in some respects. So I think
mm.
also building that mesh and that network to be a lot wider than just the UK would be
Yeah.
a fantastic way to build momentum, really.
Mm. How important do you think having the right people in your circle, the right role models is for a young person?
I think that it is paramount, to be honest, in allowing that person to traverse some of the challenges that they will have in adulting, and also having the right understanding of what parenting is. I'm not a parent, as I've mentioned, but for
Mm,
me, my attitude to it is you are raising an adult, instead of you are raising a child. No, the person is going to be, and it should change. Hopefully, the input and interaction. My mum briefed me very early on what
mm,
to do if stopped by the police, and I'm glad she did because I was stopped quite a lot, to be honest. Still stopped as an adult.
mm,
So it's important to get that civic education piece built up, and if the schools are unable, then how do we do this within communities? Is my question.
mm. Yeah. Now, obviously, in your line of work, I'm assuming, because obviously I know at the sort of other end, um, I'm seeing um, I'm seeing the end result of youth violence in the courtroom. But I'm sure you, through your work, must have seen young people who've lost their lives to youth violence, who end up where you work.
Yes, and also, as I said, I grew up in the borough that I work in, so I've had friends pass away due
Mm,
to gun and knife crime. One rather recently was murdered in the Liverpool Street area I believe last year, and he was
mm,
near my age, so in his 30s. This case, I believe, has gone through court now, and the findings were that the door supervisor saw my friend watch, assumed it cost £300,000, so phoned people to come, and assault him for this watch, which spun into a fracas, which he
mm,
lost his life in. So yeah, it's not just an experience that I've got of other people's friends and family. As I've said, I've had friends come through the doors. And I've lost friends rather young to gun and knife crime. So this is really something I'm passionate about, attempting to curtail within our community. If there's anything that I can do,
mm,
in my time, as I've said, anyone that is listening, if you operate in these spaces, feel free to reach out. As I want to lend my voice really, and efforts to making a palpable change in the time that I'm here.
mm. Well, I echo that sentiment wholly. Following on from that, I guess, is there opportunity, or have you had the experience of then having to interact with the families of a young person? And if you have, obviously, I'm not asking you to name any particular case, but really to describe that sense of loss and that raw emotions. I think it's only when you break it down in this way that there's any chance of the message getting home to some of these young people.
So I think it's a very good question. I have extensive contact with families, but I'm always careful about how I categorize anyone else's emotions. Myself, I've never lost, a child. I've lost close friends, but couldn't put myself in their shoes, so wouldn't want to tell anyone or the world how they feel. What I would say is that I feel that some of these families are bereft. Effectively, violence when it interacts with my service has catastrophic effects
Mm,
on communities as well as families, and also to young people, and also it's their young people's wider circle. You mentioned that ripple effect, friends, and friends that could potentially be considered as family to the young person.
mm,
And then there's feelings, I believe, at times of anger that are palpable from all parties. Really, I think arguably when something tragic happens and a young person does lose their life, there unfortunately are almost two sides of this in relation to both families, meaning the assailant's family and the deceased family could potentially lose a family member forever in one case, or for a very long time in others. I think the other things to think about are the impacts on those wider communities. Some individuals may feel the need, to try and get retribution, and that's when things get a little bit more difficult. I think one of the things that I will say though is there's a family member for a person that came into our service, did speak to me about legislative and regulatory gaps that exist. They were very angry in relation to, some young persons being able to buy what's categorized as a zombie knife, on the internet, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those families at times may feel that there is a system in place that almost guarantees failure at times for them. And I think that they feel at times that someone of my hue, in this role, will give them I feel gives them the impression that, you know, there isn't a grand cabal controlling every facet of government. There may be some very smaller pockets, and we've touched on some of those in some famous reports that have been published. The Casey, I think, report was the last one,
Mm-hmm.
which spoke to the attitudes and culture inside of the police still. I think I would like to see some further work done around if an officer is found guilty of gross misconduct, etc. How do we analyze that person's arrest record to ensure that every arrest or every interaction they've had with the public has been one done with clean hands? Um, but yeah, effectively, I've tried to sum up some of the feelings I think I've encountered. Yeah, manage or dealing with families.
Mm. Well, we're almost at the end of this interview. It's been a fascinating insight. Looking forward, Jahran, I just want to ask you about what's next on the agenda for you. What goals and ambitions for you?
So, good question. I think that I have to continue to explore options available to me in relation to my sort of mission statement of maximizing my impact, in the short life that I have in this world. I built out a 10-year plan for the mortuary service, which sees potentially some manner of violence reduction elements end up in the mortuary operations manager role. I'm in talks about a multimedia comic book to inspire young black men in relation to violence reduction. I'm attempting to get hold of anyone in Apple TV in relation to those sorts of projects.
Mhm.
I'm attempting to build a union of individuals that work in my field, as I think mortuary services are underrepresented across
Yeah.
the country. I'm also considering discussions, well, having discussions around venture capital, because I think we need to empower ourselves economically to be able to force people to listen in some respects. And
Mhm.
I'm also open to ideas, Stephen. So you know me relatively well now. So I'm sure we can go offline, and any ideas that you've got,
Mhm.
I'm open to listening to. But it's about that impact, really. I want to be able to affect change at a greater scale, and know that I've only got so much time left on this place, especially with climate change impacting the world the way it is.
Mhm.
The challenges really for my industry are getting more and more challenging. You can imagine. I'll give you a very quick one. In India, very recently, they had heat between 41 and 45 degrees and
Oh.
lost 133 people. Now, you can imagine what a climate event could do in terms of deaths in the
Mhm.
Western world.
Mhm.
You saw what the COVID numbers were, 200 odd thousand
Mhm.
individuals. And then if we look at individuals that suffered poor mental health, etc., due to COVID, climate is the next real big um challenge to mitigate. And I'm
Yeah.
more than happy to lend my attention to it, but it requires infrastructure to be developed and at pace and managed really. So I'm hoping that good things come out of the inquiry, really, and some strong changes are recommended and implemented, really.
Well, look, Jared, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, hearing about your fascinating work, your journey, and something you said at the end there, which I hope resonates with our viewers. We're not here indefinitely. Um, I often talk about the egg timer being turned upside down from the minute we're born. What impact are we going to have while we're here? What legacy are we going to leave? How many lives are we going to change? So, Jaron, keep being an ambassador, keep seeking to make change from the position that you're in, and keep striving to leave that legacy um, and to be great. That's all I've
Thank
got to
you.
say. So, look,
Thank
Jahran
you.
Allen-Thompson, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Life in Focus platform. I hope that we'll return again and give us an update on the project. But for now, I want to thank you for joining me on this platform. I want to thank the viewers for watching, and I just want to leave the viewers with this message, particularly the young ones, as we come up to summer, the summer holidays, which is always a nervous time for many people. And I just want to tell you, look, if you're thinking of picking up a knife, put it down. Put down knives, preserve lives, and remember, in knife crime, there are no winners. And remember the ripple effect. Think before you act. Jahran has talked about that on the platform this evening in terms of the work that he does and what he's seen. And I really want people to think carefully, especially the young ones. Think carefully about the decisions you make. You can be someone like Jahran. You can start off from a trajectory of wanting to be an architect and building a career legacy in which he's been doing now for 14 years. You never know where you're going to end up, but you got to start somewhere with that self-assuredness, that belief. So thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Jahran Allen-Thompson MBE. My name's Stephen Akinsanya, barrister at 15 Newbury Street, and you've been watching Life in Focus. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.